If you're wondering which heroes are going to help you rank up the fastest in Season 18, you've come to the right place. Hey, I'm Statius. I'm a professional Overwatch coach and former pro player. I can't wait to give you an inside look on what you need to be doing to get the most out of every single game. Find a seat and buckle up because this guide is going to change your season. Today we're looking at the top 5 heroes you should be playing in Season 18. Remember to check out our website, GameLeap.com, for in-depth courses on all the heroes I'll be going over today and much more so you can master them in no time. Check the link below and sign up today. Now before we get started, keep in mind to take these recommendations with a grain of salt. I'm not saying you shouldn't pick any other heroes, but these heroes are going to give you extremely consistent results, allowing you to rank up even faster. Now let's get into the list. At number 5, we have Hanzo. Now Hanzo can do absolutely everything a DPS needs to do in this game. He has mobility, he has great damage, he can flank, and he has a good solid ultimate, especially when comboed with one of our next characters. Now here's how you can really pop off as Hanzo. Make sure you're taking angles on the enemy shield, especially if they're playing one of the more popular bunker comps with an Orisa. If you get a pick off in this position, it can easily turn the fight in your favor, but make sure you don't stray too far from your team. Use your Sonic Arrow to scout flanks. There are plenty of areas in Overwatch, such as Junkertown First Point Defense, that have multiple flank angles for the attackers to take. And it's very important as Hanzo that you use your Sonic Arrow to watch one of those areas so you know if an enemy DPS is about to push you. Let's quickly talk about some matchups for Hanzo. Hanzo is pretty strong in basically every situation, but he can sometimes feel ineffective if your team comp doesn't have very high damage. It can be helpful to focus on burning down shields to give your team a good advantage in this situation. Next up we have our favorite quadrupedal robot, Orisa. Now Orisa is one of the strongest characters in this new meta because she has such strong defensive capability while also not being too bad when pushing in with your team. Her shield lasts a very long time with a lot of health, her pull is one of the most powerful abilities in this meta, and her ult powers up your entire team. Here's how you can get the most value out of your Orisa gameplay. Make sure to be a leader on this character. You want to be consistently communicating with your teammates, where you're going to position, when you're using your halt, and when you're using your ultimate. Now coordinate your team with this character and you'll see great success. Supercharger is a line of sight based ultimate, so try to make sure you use it where all of your teammates can see it. One last tip for Orisa. Her Fortify is an extremely important ability in her kit. Make sure you don't use it frivolously. If you're behind a full HP shield, you better not be pressing shift. Let's talk about some matchups for Orisa. Orisa is very strong, but sometimes she can struggle attacking into high ground. In these situations, it can be more helpful to play something like Winston or Wrecking Ball that gives you a lot more mobility and dive potential. Moving on to number 3, we have the gold medal master, Moira. Now, Moira is extremely strong in the new meta, which involves a lot of bunker, a lot of tight death volley compositions, similar to our old friends Goats, and involves a lot of stuns and CC. Now, Moira's Fade is exceptional at getting out of that CC. Mei starts to freeze you, just fade away, you're fine. Now, one of the most important things about Moira is making sure you're using your orbs effectively. Make sure you're not randomly throwing your orbs out at the beginning of fights, just to get a little bit more damage on the enemy team. That orb could be crucial for your team to push in or defend. One last tip from Moira, make sure you're getting as many people as possible in her ultimate, Coalescence. That purple and yellow beam deals a ton of damage and provides even more healing to your team. So make sure you're getting as many people, friendlies and enemies both, in that ultimate as possible. Let's talk about some matchups for Moira. Moira has a lot of heals, but for a relatively short amount of time. If you're playing on the defense, for example, into Pharah Junkrat, it would be most effective to swap to something like Ana or Mercy, who has much better long-term sustained healing. Now our number 2 hero on the list is going to be Mei. Now, Mei is an incredibly strong DPS in this meta, arguably the strongest. She is incredibly versatile, and her freeze, wall, and blizzard allow you to CC the enemy team until they want to uninstall the game. Here are some tips on how to get the most value out of the Ice Queen. Mei's freeze is one of her strongest abilities. It can catch all 6 of the enemies and freeze them completely still. When the enemy is pushing you, especially with dive tanks, make sure you get a solid freeze on them by trying to take a slight off angle, maybe being to the left or to the right of the enemy front line, so you can get an effective freeze and allow your team to clean them up. If the enemy has a diva, you can freeze her solid before using your blizzard to make sure she can't eat it. To pull this off correctly, make sure the diva doesn't see you when you start freezing her so she doesn't have time to quickly turn around or boost her out before you can get the freeze off. This advice will also help you get more people in your blizzards. You can slow down a target like a Lucio by hitting him with a few ticks of your freeze before you throw out that blizzard. This will prevent him from escaping and give you an easy kill. And here's one last quick tip from Mei. Do not waste your ice block. I see so many Mei players using their ice block when they're only taking 20 or 50 damage. Let your healers heal that up so you don't have to waste that important cooldown. However, when you have to use that cooldown, make sure to jump while moving in the direction of your team before you trigger that ice block. This allows you to put some distance between yourself and the enemy team while still being invulnerable to their damage. Let's quickly go over some matchups for Mei. Mei is incredibly strong against almost every DPS in the game right now, except for Reaper and Pharah. One of the reasons you're seeing so much Reaper in Overwatch League right now is because he is an effective roadblock to Mei. This doesn't mean you necessarily have to swap off of Mei though. As long as you're not being shut down, flanked, and death blossomed into oblivion, Mei can still do pretty well against Reaper. Where she really struggles, however, is against Pharah. Now, if you have a solid hit scan on your roster, you should be just fine playing against a Pharah. But if you run into Pharah without an effective counter from your other DPS, you might need to swap off. I recommend trying out Ashe and Hanzo. Now, before we move on to our number one hero in Season 18 meta, I want to throw out an honorable mention to one of the healers that I think will be the strongest in the next season, and that is Baptiste. Now, Baptiste has a ton of utility and healing output to really help keep your team alive, especially when facing a high damage comp like Bunker. Here's a few ways you can support your team even better with Baptiste. Try to use your immortality field around a corner so the enemy team can't easily burst it down. This will give you a much needed advantage in the team fight, allowing you to swing things in your favor. Now, this tip is most useful when you're playing with an Orisa. Try to wait until your Orisa uses a new shield before placing down your ultimate, the Amplification Matrix. This will allow your team to get much more value out of it than if you placed it in front of a shield that was almost broken. Here are my thoughts on the matchups for Baptiste. Baptiste is a strong healer in almost every situation, but he can struggle in a few rare scenarios. Sometimes it can be very difficult to push through a choke with Baptiste. For example, on Pharah's first point attack, it can be quite hard to push through that choke without an effective healer that has an escape ability. So I'd recommend trying Moira here. If you're unable to run Moira, Lucio and Mercy are also effective options. Now, our number one character for Season 18 is Sigma. Now, Sigma is very, very, very strong right now. And one of the big reasons is his incredible damage output. And he shines even stronger if you're getting more effective hero damage than going for shield damage alone. So don't use those orbs just for shooting shields, try to get them on the entire enemy team as well. You can bounce Sigma's orbs off of walls next to people's shields to get a lot of damage on the heroes behind them. This is especially effective when you're playing into enemies that are closely grouped together. Now, while you're doing this, don't forget about his shield. You should almost constantly be moving his shield, repositioning it with your team and yourself to make sure you're covering as best as possible. Also, if your team has moved past the position of that shield and you don't need it for a few seconds, let's say you're playing with an Orisa, which will be very common, you can take it down to recharge it, just like you do on Reinhardt. Something to keep in mind with Sigma's rock ability, Accretion, is that it does more stun the farther away the enemy is. Now, this is especially important in 1v1s, so keep in mind if you're taking a short-range fight that the enemy won't be on the ground for very long. Now let's go over our matchups for the best hero in Season 18, Sigma. Sigma is very strong in almost every situation, so you'll most likely find you don't need to swap off of him very much. But there are a few scenarios where it's more helpful to play a different tank. The best time to swap off of Sigma is if you are the only shield tank on your team. If you have no Rein and no Orisa, and no Winston, I find it's best to play Orisa instead of Sigma. However, if you do have an Orisa, the Orisa-Sigma combo is almost unstoppable. Sometimes you can run into a bit of trouble while playing Orisa-Sigma if you're playing against a very aggressive dive setup with a Hammond, Lucio, Moira, etc. I find in those situations, it's more effective for the Sigma to swap to D.Va or Roadhog. It's time to take control of your games. The fastest way to do that is to watch our in-depth series of guides on each hero created by some of the highest rated players and coaches so you can fully understand how to start playing like a GM player. You'll learn everything from specific mechanics to decision making, positioning, and much, much more. GameLeap.com is the largest library of pro player guides available, and we highly recommend that you give it a shot. Getting a membership costs the exact same as a Twitch sub. We are so confident in our product that we are happy to give you a full refund if you're not 100% satisfied. Click on the link below and watch your SR skyrocket.